The heavy brass door handle completed its turn, and Vincent Cassano stepped over the threshold, the dark wool of his long overcoat rustling softly against the door frame as he entered the dim study. His smoke-gray eyes immediately dropped to my lap, where the high-resolution glossy photographs of my university years lay scattered across my knees like a deck of shattered illusions. The air in the room froze instantly, the gentle warmth of the crackling fireplace completely neutralized by the sudden, suffocating wave of tension that materialized between us. I remained kneeling on the intricate Persian rug, my fingers trembling so violently that the edge of a photograph depicting me outside the New York University library snapped against my thumb. Vincent stood completely still for 3 agonizing seconds, his chiseled jaw tightening until a small muscle ticked beneath his bronze skin, yet his expression remained a mask of absolute, unreadable composure. He closed the heavy oak door behind him with a soft, deliberate click, cutting off the distant murmur of his perimeter guards before walking toward the mahogany desk with slow, predatory strides. I looked up at him, my vision blurring with tears of profound shock and betrayal as I clutched the green plastic butterfly hair clip against my chest like a dying ember. 5 years, Vincent, 5 years of my life documented, catalogued, and hidden away in a secret drawer while I believed our meeting in that midnight storm was a twist of fate. Vincent stopped exactly 2 feet from where I knelt, his towering 6'2" frame casting a massive shadow that completely enveloped my smaller form in the dim light. He slowly unbuttoned his dark coat, throwing it over a nearby leather armchair with a smooth gesture before sinking down onto one knee right in front of me, bringing his chiseled face level with mine. He did not reach out to touch me this time. Instead, he placed his large hands flat on his thighs, his gray eyes burning with an intense, raw honesty that I had never witnessed beneath his syndicate armor. The storm was entirely real, Valerie Clara, and the bullet wounds that drained my blood onto your linoleum floor were not an act, but your presence in my life has never been an accident. I pulled my knees away from his proximity, my voice a shaky, fragmented whisper that sounded fragile against the heavy mahogany bookshelves surrounding us. You are a stalker, Vincent. You are a ghost who has been pulling the strings of my reality, while I labored under the delusion that I was helping a wounded stranger out of Christian charity. Vincent closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, his chest expanding with a deep, torturous breath before he reached down to gently slide the manila folder from beneath my hand, exposing an old newspaper clipping hidden at the very bottom of the file. He pointed his long index finger at a faded photograph of an older gentleman standing outside a vintage medical laboratory, his severe features softening into an expression of ancient, solemn reverence. This man was your father, Valerie, and exactly 5 years ago, his advanced pharmaceutical research saved my own father from a lethal toxin administered by the very same syndicate family that currently hunts us. Your family paid the ultimate price for that loyalty in a staged highway accident, and before my father took his final breath, he made me swear an oath on our family crest to watch over you from the shadows, ensuring that the last surviving bloodline of our Savior would never be extinguished by the darkness of New York. The faded newspaper clipping trembled between my fingers as Vincent's words echoed through the silent study, reconstructing my entire family history with a single devastating truth. I stared at the grainy photograph of my father, his kind eyes looking back at me from across a 5-year void, while the realization that his sudden death on an icy New Jersey turnpike had been a calculated assassination shattered my remaining innocence. The green plastic butterfly hair clip slipped from my hand, falling onto the dark pattern of the Persian rug unnoticed as I reached out to touch the yellowed paper, my medical mind instantly analyzing the hidden variables of a tragedy I had accepted as a mere accident. Vincent remained kneeling on the floorboards, his powerful frame entirely motionless as he allowed me to process the absolute magnitude of his revelation, his gray eyes watching the rapid shifts of grief and horror across my face with profound solemnity. I pulled my gaze away from the archive, looking into his severe, chiseled face while a cold sweat broke out along the nape of my neck. You let me believe they died because of a faulty steering column, Vincent. You let me spend half a decade blaming an invisible mechanical error, while the real monsters walked the streets of Manhattan. Vincent reached out, his bare fingers hovering just an inch above my hand, offering an unspoken comfort without violating the emotional boundary I had erected between us. If I had told you the truth 5 years ago, Valerie Clara, the syndicate would have detected your grief, they would have traced my protection detail directly to your university dormitory, and they would have finished what they started on that highway. My silence was the only armor thick enough to keep you alive, while I dismantled the factions responsible for your father's demise. I stood up abruptly, my leather boots backing away from the desk until my shoulder blades hit the heavy wood of the mahogany bookshelf, my arms crossing over my chest in a defensive posture. So my entire life has been a curated experiment, my medical residency, my pharmacy location in Brooklyn, even that midnight storm when you collapsed onto my floor, it was all orchestrated by the Cassano family. Vincent straightened to his full 6'2" height, his broad shoulders squaring as he took a single, controlled step toward my position, his deep voice dropping to a gravelly, intense register that vibrated through the quiet room. I did not plan the ambush on the bridge, Valerie, nor did I choose to take 2 steel slugs to my ribcage during that specific blizzard. But when my driver collapsed at the wheel, I ordered him to head toward your neighborhood because I knew your pharmacy was the only sanctuary left in this city where my soul could find rest. I never intended to drag you into my world this way, but the moment your uncle compromised our security, my sacred oath to protect your father's daughter became a desperate race to keep you breathing. He stopped 3 feet away, his expression a mixture of profound regret and unyielding possessive devotion as the dying embers of the fireplace cast long, flickering shadows across his dark suit, leaving me stranded between the memory of my past and the terrifying reality of his protection. The heavy silence of the study grew colder as the truth settled between us, turning the luxurious mansion into a fortress of suffocating secrets. I stared at Vincent, my hands clenching into tight fists against my sides as my mind struggled to separate the man who had protected me from the monster who had kept me in the dark. The realization that my entire adult life had been monitored, that every choice I made had been overlooked by a Mafia shadow, left me feeling completely stripped of my autonomy. Vincent remained perfectly upright, his towering form casting a long silhouette across the dark Persian rug as he waited for my response. His eyes locked onto mine with a heavy, unyielding intensity. I shook my head slowly, taking another step backward until my back pressed hard against the cold glass of the arched window. I need you to leave this room, Vincent. I cannot look at your face right now without seeing 5 years of lies and manipulation wrapped in a tailored suit. Vincent did not move an inch. His strong jaw tightened significantly, and his smoke-gray eyes darkened with a flash of genuine pain that he quickly masked behind his usual cold composure. He reached down, slowly picking up his dark wool overcoat from the velvet armchair with a deliberate, heavy movement that signaled his reluctant acceptance of my demand. You have every right to despise my methods, Valerie Clara, but you will remain inside this estate where my soldiers can guarantee your safety until the rival syndicate is entirely neutralized. I turned my face toward the frosty glass, watching the heavy winter snow blanket the endless acres of the Long Island property, completely ignoring his presence as the tears finally spilled over my eyelashes. Your safety feels exactly like a prison sentence, Vincent, and until I can look at you without feeling like a curated science project, I want nothing to do with your family or your protection. Vincent paused near the doorway, his large hand resting on the heavy brass handle as he looked back over his broad shoulder, his gaze lingering on my trembling form with a fierce, possessive sorrow that seemed to vibrate through the quiet air. I will grant you the distance you require, Valerie, but do not mistake my absence for a lack of vigilance, because my world never stops watching the only asset it cannot afford to lose. The heavy oak door shut with a soft, hollow click, leaving me completely alone with the ticking grandfather clock, and the devastating realization that the man who held my heart was the same ghost who had haunted my past. 3 days of icy isolation had transformed the grand Long Island estate into a silent mausoleum of marble and velvet. I remained confined to the West Wing, spending my hours pacing the floorboards of the massive guest suite, while the winter storm outside finally died down, leaving behind a thick, freezing fog that obscured the perimeter gates. Vincent had honored his word to a torturous degree. He had not crossed the threshold of my quarters since our confrontation in the study, yet his suffocating presence was everywhere, manifested in the gourmet meals delivered by silent maids and the constant, rhythmic pacing of armed guards outside my balcony. It was late afternoon when the delicate porcelain teacup in my hand suddenly rattled against its saucer, a strange, low vibration humming through the floorboards that had absolutely nothing to do with the winter wind. I froze, my medical senses instantly mapping the anomaly as a series of distant, muffled thuds echoed from the northern edge of the property, followed by the frantic, screeching wail of the estate's automated security sirens. The bedroom door burst open with tremendous force, and Marco materialized in the opening. His custom black suit jacket unbuttoned to reveal a heavy tactical harness while his face was entirely drained of its usual professional calm. He scanned the room frantically, his large hand gripping the handle of his weapon as he gestured toward the rear service corridor with a sharp, commanding jerk of his chin. "Miss Clara, we have a catastrophic breach at the outer checkpoint, and you need to move to the underground reinforced shelter right this second." I dropped the porcelain cup, letting it shatter on the hardwood as a cold wave of adrenaline flooded my veins, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Where is Vincent, Marco? Is he at the main gates or is he still inside the Central Command office?" Marco grabbed my arm with a firm, protective grip, practically lifting me off my feet as he dragged me into the hidden concrete service stairwell, his eyes darting toward the high-security cameras that were flickering out one by one into pure blackness. "The boss left the estate 45 minutes ago for an emergency summit in Manhattan, Valerie, which means this entire infiltration was timed perfectly to exploit his absence and eliminate you as his primary vulnerability." A heavy explosion rocked the foundation of the mansion, blowing out the stained glass windows at the end of the hall and sending a shower of colorful, razor-sharp shards raining down onto the Persian carpets. I stumbled against the cold concrete wall of the descending stairs, my medical headspace fracturing under the sheer terror of the assault, realizing that the rival syndicate was no longer negotiating or tracking us from a distance. They had officially arrived at the doorstep to tear Vincent's kingdom down by using my life as the ultimate leverage. The heavy steel door of the underground reinforced shelter slammed shut with a deafening metallic clang, sealing us inside a subterranean bunker filled with the hum of backup generators and rows of tactical monitors. I stumbled into the middle of the room, my hands bracing against a metal medical cart, while the concrete floorboards beneath my feet vibrated from another distant blast rocking the Long Island mansion above. Marco collapsed against the reinforcement wall right beside the entrance, his fingers desperately tearing open his dark suit jacket to reveal a deep crimson stain spreading rapidly across the shoulder of his white dress shirt. The massive lieutenant gasped for air, his teeth grinding together in pure agony as he tried to maintain his protective stance while his sidearm slipped from his weakened grip and clattered onto the linoleum. My medical headspace completely overrode my terror. I rushed forward, my bare hands instantly tearing away the fabric of his shirt to inspect the jagged puncture wound where a sharp fragment of window glass had sliced a major artery. "Sit down on the floor, Marco. Do not move that arm, or you will drain your circulatory system before the perimeter team can regain control of the upper levels." Marco shook his head violently, his eyes darting to the security monitors displaying the static-filled feeds of the estate's courtyard before he looked up at me with absolute, unyielding loyalty. "Forget about my shoulder, Valerie. You need to hide in the rear vault because the primary security gates have been entirely bypassed, and my remaining soldiers are outnumbered 3-1 out there." I ignored his protest entirely, my fingers diving into the emergency medical kit on the cart to retrieve a roll of sterile gauze and a bottle of antiseptic fluid, my movements precise and clinical despite the chaos. "I am a resident physician, Marco, and I do not abandon a bleeding patient to hide in a closet while my own life is being paid for in human collateral." I pressed a thick pad of gauze directly into his wound, applying all my body weight to stanch the bleeding, while another explosion above shattered the connection to 3 more security cameras on the console. The main lights flickered violently before dying out completely, plunging the concrete bunker into a terrifying, deep crimson glow as the auxiliary emergency lamps activated along the ceiling. Marco's radio crackled to life with static, a frantic voice from the perimeter team breaking through the distortion before being cut off by a sharp, definitive silence that signaled the final breach of our defenses. I locked eyes with the giant lieutenant in the red shadows, my heart hammering against my ribs as the muffled sound of heavy footsteps began to echo directly down the concrete staircase outside our final steel barrier. The shadow of heavy boots moved beneath the gap of the reinforced steel door, accompanied by the cold metallic scrape of an unauthorized override device being clamped onto the external locking mechanism. I maintained absolute downward pressure on Marco's bleeding shoulder, my fingers sticky with crimson fluid as the giant lieutenant tried to push me behind his broad frame with his uninjured arm, his teeth grinding together in desperate frustration. The red emergency lights bathed the bunker in a bloody glow, casting long, frantic silhouettes across the row of dead monitors, while the air grew thick with the smell of ozone and gunpowder filtering down from the mansion above. A sudden massive explosion shattered the heavy locking pins of the steel door, blowing the heavy barrier inward by 3 inches with a violent screech of tearing metal that sent a wave of dust billowing into our faces. Before the smoke could even clear, 3 armed syndicate operatives clad in dark tactical gear stepped over the ruined threshold, their submachine guns raised in perfect synchronization as they scanned the dim room for their primary target. I held my ground, shielding Marco's slumped body with my own torso while my chest heaved with absolute terror, my eyes locking onto the lead infiltrator who stepped forward with a slow, victorious stride. A cold, sudden draft from the stairwell slammed into the room, followed by a sound that made my heart completely stop its frantic rhythm. The distinctive, deafening roar of a modified luxury engine tearing through the mansion's upper courtyard. The lead operative spun around in pure confusion, but he never completed the motion as a single, high-caliber round shattered the concrete door frame right beside his head, scattering sharp gravel into his mask. Vincent Cassano materialized out of the dark hallway like an absolute specter of vengeance. His long black wool overcoat billowed behind him as he moved with a fluid, terrifying precision that completely defied human reaction time. He did not issue a single command. Instead, his smoke-gray eyes burned with an icy catastrophic rage that turned the subterranean bunker into his personal hunting ground as he neutralized the threat with 2 blindingly fast movements of his arm. The remaining infiltrators retreated into the corridor in absolute panic, their tactical boots scrambling against the concrete stairs as the overwhelming sound of Vincent's primary enforcement detail flooded the upper levels, signaling the total recapture of the estate. Vincent stepped into the center of the bunker, his chest rising and falling with a heavy, dangerous rhythm while the silver weapon in his right hand reflected the deep red emergency illumination. He dropped the firearm onto the metal medical cart with a loud clatter, his eyes instantly sweeping across the room until they locked onto my trembling form kneeling in the shadows beside his wounded lieutenant. He ran to my side with desperate strides, his heavy leather boots skidding on the linoleum as he dropped to both knees before me, his large hands reaching out to cup my face with a terrifying, protective ferocity. His palms were warm against my cold skin, but when he drew them back, his smoke-gray eyes widened slightly as he noticed the dark crimson stains covering my hands and the sleeves of my white sweater. "Valerie Clara, look at me right now. Are you wounded? Did those monsters touch you before I reached the perimeter?" I shook my head slowly, a sudden, overwhelming sob escaping my throat as the sheer weight of my survival crashed over my consciousness, my trembling hands reaching out to grab the lapels of his suit jacket. "The blood belongs to Marco Vincent." He took a jagged piece of glass to his shoulder to keep me from being taken by those men. Vincent pulled me into his chest with immense force, his strong arms wrapping around my back until my face was buried in the warm wool of his coat, his body trembling with a profound, hidden vulnerability that he had never allowed his syndicate captains to witness. He buried his face in my hair, his deep voice dropping to a low, ragged vibration that echoed straight into my bones as the sounds of the battle above finally faded into a cold, absolute silence. "I broken every traffic law in the state of New York to get back to this house, Valerie, because the very second my monitors reported the breach, I realized that my entire empire is completely worthless if you are not breathing inside of it." By midnight, the echoes of the assault had completely dissolved into the freezing air of Long Island, leaving the central mansion under the absolute militaristic control of Vincent Cassano's personal reinforcement detail. I sat on the edge of the massive canopy bed in the primary guest suite, my freshly washed hands resting on my knees while the faint, sharp smell of antiseptic on my skin mingled with the soothing aroma of hot chamomile tea sitting untouched on the nightstand. The door handle clicked softly, and Vincent stepped into the bedroom, having shed his dark wool overcoat and tactical harness to reveal only his black dress shirt, its sleeves rolled up to his forearms to expose the heavy tendons of his wrists. He stopped at the foot of the bed, his imposing 6'2" frame silhouetted by the warm orange glow of the fireplace while his smoke-gray eyes scanned my posture for any lingering signs of physical or psychological trauma. He did not maintain his usual distance. Instead, he walked forward with slow, unhurried strides and sank onto his right knee right before me, lowering his entire formidable stature until his chiseled face was level with my lap. He reached out, his large, calloused hands carefully enveloping my fingers, his grip incredibly gentle as he lifted my hands to press the palms directly against his own chest, right over the steady, powerful thudding of his heart beneath the thin fabric of his shirt. I have ruled the 5 boroughs of New York for a decade through fear and absolute calculation, Valerie Clara, but looking at the security feeds tonight and seeing your life hanging by a single thin wire shattered every foundation I have ever built. I looked down at him, my vision blurring with a mixture of leftover adrenaline and a profound, aching tenderness as I felt the rapid vibration of his heartbeat under my fingertips. You almost died on my pharmacy floor because of an ancient blood feud, Vincent, and tonight your closest friend bled on a concrete bunker floor just because I am connected to your shadow. Vincent tightened his grip on my fingers, his strong jaw clenching as he tilted his head upward, his gray eyes burning with an intense, raw honesty that completely stripped away his identity as the sovereign king of the underworld. Marco is currently stable in the medical wing because your magnificent hand stabilized his artery before my tactical team even cleared the driveway. But you need to understand that you are no longer just a debt of honor left by your father. I kept you in the dark for 5 years because I believed the shadow of my family name would destroy your beautiful, innocent world. But tonight I realized that my silence almost allowed the darkness to take you away from me forever. He reached up with his right hand, his long fingers sliding gently into the hair at the nape of my neck to draw me just 2 inches closer, his forehead coming to rest softly against mine as his warm breath brushed across my lips. I will tear down every rival faction from New York to Atlantic City until there is not a single ghost left to threaten your existence. But I am begging you to forgive the lies of a man who only knew how to love you from the shadows. I closed my eyes, letting my forehead rest completely against his as a profound wave of acceptance finally washed over my exhaustion, my fingers wrapping tightly around his wrists as I realized that the silent king had surrendered his entire pride just to keep me anchored by his side. 2 weeks later, the crisp morning air of Brooklyn carried the familiar, comforting scent of roasted coffee beans and salty Atlantic breeze filtering through the open doorway of my family's old pharmacy. I stood behind the newly polished mahogany counter, my fingers tracing the sleek edge of a state-of-the-art digital inventory monitor that had replaced our ancient, clacking cash register. The entire structure had been completely transformed. The bullet-shattered storefront was gone, replaced by thick, reinforced security glass that looked completely transparent yet could withstand a high-caliber projectile, while a discreet medical clinic annex now extended into the adjacent building. Vincent had kept his promise to an absolute, staggering degree, employing an entire construction battalion to rebuild my father's legacy into a modern sanctuary of healing within 14 days. I looked up as a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the bright New York sun before the passenger door opened and Vincent stepped out onto the concrete pavement. He had discarded his formal syndicate attire for a tailored dark wool sweater and charcoal trousers, his 6'2" frame moving with a relaxed, confident grace that instantly drew the attention of everyone walking down the Brooklyn Avenue. He stepped inside the pharmacy, the overhead brass bell chiming softly to announce his presence as his smoke-gray eyes immediately locked onto mine, a rare genuine warmth softening the severe contours of his chiseled face. He walked toward the counter, placing a small velvet-lined box next to my medical ledger before leaning his broad forearms against the polished wood, his gaze taking in my white laboratory coat with profound admiration. The permits from the New York State Board of Pharmacy have been entirely finalized, Valerie Clara, and the security detail disguised as delivery drivers will maintain a permanent 24-hour perimeter around this city block. I closed the ledger, a soft smile breaking across my face as I stepped out from behind the counter to stand right in front of him, my hands sliding naturally into the warm pockets of my coat. You built me a fortress disguised as a community clinic, Vincent, and you gave me back my father's dream without forcing me to remain a prisoner inside your Long Island estate. Vincent reached out, his large, warm hand gently cupping my chin to lift my face toward his thumb tracing a slow, tender path across my jawline while his voice dropped to a low, melodic vibration that resonated deep in my chest. I gave you a sanctuary because your soul belongs in the light, Valerie, but I want you to know that the deed to this property is entirely in your name, and you are completely free to walk away from my world if my shadow still brings you fear. I looked into his stormy gray eyes, realizing that the absolute freedom he was offering me was the ultimate testament to his devotion. Yet my heart had already made its permanent decision during that terrifying night in the subterranean bunker. I reached out, my fingers wrapping tightly around his wrist as I leaned my head against his solid chest, listening to the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heart before looking back up into his handsome face. I spent 5 years being protected by a ghost, Vincent, but I do not want a ghost anymore. I want the man who stands in front of me, and I am choosing to stay by your side, whether we are in the light of Brooklyn or the shadows of your kingdom. The soft, golden illumination of a late winter sunset washed over the expansive stone balcony of the primary master suite at the Long Island estate, painting the endless acres of snow-covered pine trees in shades of warm amber and violet. I stood near the carved stone railing, my hands wrapped snugly around a warm ceramic mug of spice cider, as the gentle evening breeze ruffled the edges of my cream-colored wool sweater. The frantic terrors of the Syndicate War had entirely subsided, replaced by a profound, breathtaking serenity that made the chaotic midnight storm at my Brooklyn pharmacy feel like an ancient, faded dream. A sudden familiar warmth enveloped my backside as Vincent Cassano stepped out onto the balcony, his towering 6'2" frame shielding me perfectly from the biting winter wind. He did not say a word at first. Instead, his powerful long arms slid around my waist from behind, his large hands resting flat against my stomach to anchor me firmly against his solid, muscular chest. He leaned his chiseled jaw against the crown of my head, his chest expanding with a slow, deeply relaxed sigh that vibrated through my entire posture, signaling a level of peace he had never possessed before. I leaned back into his firm embrace, letting my head rest against his broad shoulder as I looked out at the twilight horizon, my heart beating with a steady, absolute tranquility that mirrored the stillness of the estate. Vincent slowly withdrew his right hand from my waist, reaching into his pocket to retrieve the small velvet-lined box he had carried from the pharmacy earlier, before opening it to reveal a heavy, platinum band encrusted with brilliant diamonds that captured the final rays of the setting sun. Resting right beside the magnificent ring was the cheap, green plastic butterfly hair clip that had started our journey half a decade ago, its simple surface preserved perfectly within the luxurious fabric lining. He turned me gently within his arms until I was facing him, his smoke-gray eyes burning with an intense, raw adoration that completely captivated my senses, his chiseled features softened by a rare, breathtaking smile. 5 years ago, I took a sacred oath to protect your father's daughter from the darkness of this world, Valerie Clara. But tonight I am asking you to stand by my side as the ultimate queen of my heart and the sole ruler of my empire. I looked down at the twin symbols of our journey, my eyes filling with tears of profound happiness, as I reached out to touch the smooth surface of the green hair clip before sliding my fingers over his warm hand. I spent my entire residency trying to heal broken bodies, Vincent, but I never realized that my true purpose was to heal the soul of a silent king who chose to bleed for me in the dark. Vincent slid the platinum band onto my finger with a slow, reverent motion, his large hand instantly moving up to cradle the back of my neck with a fierce, possessive tenderness that sent a wave of absolute warmth rushing through my veins. He drew me close until our lips were just a fraction of an inch apart, his gray eyes locking onto mine with an unyielding commitment that promised a lifetime of absolute protection and devotion. You are no longer a captive in a gilded cage, Valerie, and you are no longer a secret hidden in my files. You are my light, you are my redemption, and as long as I have breath in my body, this entire kingdom will bow to your name. He pulled me into a deep, slow embrace under the fading New York twilight, his strong arms holding me so tightly against his chest that the boundary lines between our two worlds completely dissolved, cementing a beautiful, permanent future where the Queen of Healing finally ruled the heart of the Mafia King.